son was born that week, and then I kind of pulled out of it. This is my journey. Again, unlike many of you, I think when I talk to people of today's age, people have a lot more clarity on what their plans are, right? Which was clearly not applicable to me. Okay? So, I grew up in an academic family. Both my parents were academicians, so there was no pressure at all, and no pressure at all really. And but the most of the pressure I had because I had a twin brother, and we were in the same class, the same school, and my rank was 5 from the bottom, and my brother's rank was 5 from the top. So again, my parents, of course, never bothered about it, but of course there was a lot of external pressure. Okay? So, unlike many people, I did not strongly dislike any subjects, but neither did I have any clarity on what I wanted to do. So at the class 10 level, because of my little bit of inclination towards maths, I chose statistics as one of the additional subjects, and then I veered it into engineering. So I did my undergraduation from Jadavpur University in mechanical engineering. And after that, I took a 1-year break where I worked at Thermax in Pune and Maruti in Gurgaon. And that gave me the clarity where I do not want to belong. Okay, so I came back for my master's, again in IIT Kanpur in mechanical engineering, where my specialization was in robotics. Okay, so I wanted to apply for PhD in robotics abroad. And unfortunately, in the US, in most departments, robotics is part of computer science. So nearly all the departments rejected my application, saying I don't have adequate background, adequate training in computer science. So UPenn was one place where robotics was actually in mechanical engineering department. And then they said, well, this time there are no vacancies in robotics, but there is one guy who does biophysics. Would you be interested? I said anything will do, without really knowing what it meant. Okay? So I joined the lab of Dennis Tischer at UPenn. So he's a core faculty in chemical engineering, but as is very customary in the US, you are listed across multiple departments. So I joined this lab, not knowing. So when I first got the offer and I asked him, do you think, I have not had any biology after class 10, do you think, my background, my training would be of any value? He said that, yeah, it will definitely be of value. Let's say, and he gave this example, if I give you 2 noodle strands, okay, which are well cooked, and I want you to estimate the force required to separate them. Okay, so I said, okay, no, of course I understand that there is mechanics involved, and that's what I started working with in single cell biophysics broadly in his lab. And it was during our PhD work that he showed that the microenvironment, the physical properties of the microenvironment are a major regulator of stem cell differentiation. Okay. So subsequently I went to Berkeley, okay, where I did my postdoc in the lab of Sanjay Kumar, and I came back to India in 2010. I joined IIT Bombay. Okay, so this was broadly the theme of my group that I wanted to establish in India. Now, having given my background training in mechanical engineering, it was obvious that I was going to apply to mechanical engineering departments in India across different institutes. And unfortunately, there was almost a 1.5 year of hiatus. So, in India, you only hear when your application moves forward. Otherwise, it's a black hole. And that was what was in my case. So, I was attending the American Society for Cell Biology meeting at UC San Francisco. And I just, saw someone with an IIT Bombay tag who walked past. So I ran after him. That person turned out to be Professor Dulal Panda, that HOD of Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering at that time. And I introduced myself to him. I said, I'm interested in returning to India and so on and so forth. And then I applied there as well as a few of the ISERs, because there was another, if not YIM, some program at UC San Francisco where Jitu Mayer, Satyajit Rath, few others came, telling us about ISERs. So I had also started applying to ISERs. Okay? Anyway, so the way things worked out, that eventually I had joined IIT Bombay with a princely startup of 10 lakhs. Okay? And this is, again, in India, very often you don't, the institute does not plan for you to join. Okay, so I really got my functional lab 3 years after joining, which is fairly customary in Indian circles. Well, with cell culture microscopy being central requirement, but that could only be entertained 3-4 years after I joined. So I started most of my work in trying to secure funds, so because 10 lakhs is not enough to set up an experimental lab. Okay? So of course, writing to the standard set of agencies, trying to secure funds, and I realized very early on that in a place like IIT Bombay, where intramural funds are very limited, okay, we have to try to diversify a little bit so we can tap into multiple sources of funding, be it basic, be it applied, try to secure multi-institute, multi-PI grants, and also access CSR funding, which has really come up in the last 7-8 years or something. And I'm sure across most institutes, including at IIT Bombay, there are schemes to fund high-end equipment, and that's how through an initiative where we must show that at least 3 or more than 3 departments are going to access that facility, I set up the BioAFM facility. Okay, so broadly speaking, I work on these areas. So as I said, that microenvironment, be it the stem cell niche, be it the tumor microenvironment, the aspect that my lab is interested in is looking at how the stiffness, the tissue properties matter in regulate properties. Okay? And as this shows that within tissues you have very distinct microenvironments that exist. And I am broadly working on these 4 areas: cancer biology, stem cell biology to a lesser extent, given it's very cost intensive. Of late, in the last few years, I've started working with diabetes and a little bit of tissue engineering and drug delivery. Okay, so when I started my lab, particularly in the area of cancer, we were interested in knowing how does cancer cells migrate through very dense tissues, where the pore sizes of the tissues can be substantially smaller than the size of the nucleus. The nucleus is the largest and stiffest organelle. So that represents a major roadblock for cells to migrate and invade other tissues. So using multiple studies, we zoomed in on the probing the crosstalk between the matrix and the environment mediated by MMPs, which are matrix digesting enzymes. And broadly what we showed was cell nuclear mechanics, that is properties of the cell and the nucleus, are intimately tied to that of MMP availability, proteolytic availability. And when you inhibit proteases, the cells are able to escape the normal protease-dependent migration. They adopt non-proteolytic modes of migration by softening themselves. Okay, so how the MMP and cytoskeleton are actually having an active crosstalk between them, and the cells somehow are able to escape. So the other aspect that we got to know is that the microenvironment is not just a physical regulator, but the physical properties of the microenvironment dictate the composition of the secretome of cancer cells. Okay? What the cells secrete, and which in turn has huge implications so far as having crosstalk with other cells within the tumor microenvironment. Increasingly, the role of stromal cells have gained importance, and what we have shown is that through this stiffness-dependent crosstalk, they secrete factors which reprogram stromal cells such as mesenchymal stem cells into cancer-associated fibroblastic, which actually help in cancer invasion. So one of the structures that we have been focusing on over the last several years is the glycocalyx. Okay? So as this picture shows, this is the optically clear zone around the cells. So you look at the scale bar, it is 10 microns. So it is optically clear, hence not visible, but if you incubate with RBCs, you see the RBCs are not able to come as close as to the cell surface. So this is your glycocalyx, which can be as thick as tens of microns. And what we have shown is that by using fact space sorting, we show that the glycocalyx dictates the extent of cell phenotype's attachment to the substrate, and therefore you can have phenotypes similar to circulating tumor cells if you have cells which are very thin glycocalyx. So this glycocalyx also has a role in physically shielding cancer cells from invasion-associated stresses. If we remove the glycocalyx, the cells become much more susceptible to physical stresses and undergo DNA damage in the nucleus. Moreover, given the complex glycosylation patterns of various glycoproteins, these act as a physicochemical barrier that can restrict uptake of drug molecules. So this is a potential therapeutic target. In the context of diabetic foot ulcer, once again we found glycocalyx to be a major player dictating the phenotype of diabetic dermal fibroblasts, which constantly die off. Again, we showed that by isolating fibroblasts from patients, we showed that diabetic dermal fibroblasts possess a very bulky glycocalyx, okay, mainly mucin 16, which if we disrupt, not only does it prevent fibroblast apoptosis, it makes the cells more motile, it makes them secrete more collagen, which would ideally enable to kickstart wound healing, which is what we have recently established using diabetic rat models. Okay? So we are also applying for a patent for this work and taking this forward as a therapeutic target. So roughly from my group here at IIT Bombay, I have graduated around 14 PhD students, another 10 are being trained, 3 postdocs. So this has led to several papers, some patent applications, and has been acknowledged in terms of awards and fellowships. Okay? So what are the considerations for building a research group? Particularly for people who come from interdisciplinary background. Choosing the department is one of the most important decisions, because the department will dictate what is the background of students that you are likely to get. So if you are an electrical engineer, you might not be best suited for electrical engineering because you may get the best students, but none of whom might be interested in working on the projects that you are floating. Okay? Conversely, in a department such as BSB at IIT Bombay, in 14 years, I have not gotten a single mechanical engineering student. Yes, they just not apply. Yes, so this is ground reality that we have to work with. Okay? And we have to decide that what are the competencies that we wish to train with our students, and that has to be literally, you have to operate as a teacher one-on-one with your students. Okay? What is your group size? Yesterday they said you cannot handle more than 10 students. One of the considerations that I would like to put forward is what is the expertise, and redundancy. In today's day and age, you want to aspire for a big paper, which means that a lot of work has to be done. So it is highly likely that by the time you submit your paper, your student is close to graduation. Who is going to address all the rigorous concerns? These are very practical concerns that have to be taken into consideration, which means that when you have a senior student who is in his or 4th year or 5th year, 4th year, you have another student who gets trained. So there is a transfer of knowledge. So continuity is very important, not just in terms of establishing protocols, in terms of making sure that data is reproducible within the same lab. And very often you see observations of a senior student are not reproducible by a junior student, and it is not necessarily because of data fudging, but it is also because of technique, and at least that aspect needs to be taken care of. In my experience, PhDs I have found to be better than postdocs. This of course is very contextual depending on what quality students you get, but with a PhD you have ample time to train, to enthuse them, to motivate them. They are under a lot less family constraints and secondary considerations which may dictate, which may influence their work ethic. Okay? Fine-tuning, project scope based on student strengths is very critical. So for example, my very first PhD student whom I had hired So she was from a tissue engineering background, and I had hired her on a computational project, given that in 3 years, there was unlikely to be any resources that I would get. However, after 2 years, I realized that it is not going anywhere. And eventually, I said, okay, let us frame a tissue engineering project. Maybe I will learn from it. And then that is what I will teach to others. So you have to be flexible. So very often, what we want is not what we get. So you have to walk halfway so that you can combine your expertise and continue to broaden the horizon, include more expertise that you can through your trainings. Okay? Very important to let students fail firsthand. Okay? So otherwise, that sense of independence will never come. If you are doing hand-holding every day and day out, it is very unlikely that they will graduate to be able to think by themselves. Okay? To be able to troubleshoot by themselves. I think that is the most important ingredient that is required in a successful PhD. Publications, other things follow much later, but that can only happen if the student is suitably trained enough that he or she can think, can troubleshoot, and when they come to you, they don't just come, okay, what next? But rather they have some plans, you have a discussion, a two-way discussion, which then poses the, what is the way forward or so far as troubleshooting is concerned. Okay? So institutional support is very key. When I joined for an institute of 700 faculty size, there was one confocal microscope. Situation has changed, and it has changed only because newly joined faculty have proactively participated in trying to get hold of funding such as FIST and other things to increase the infrastructure. There have been IITs, IIT Bombay has been Institute of Eminence through which we have acquired a lot of funds. Okay? We still don't have an animal facility which is currently being built. These are very practical constraints which you are going to find. But one of the most stumbling blocks which not only us but many people in our country support is from APC publication charges. Right? So that is, at the government level it has to be worked out. In IIT Bombay, for example, we offer, they give us 1 lakh per year, which is still puny, but something as opposed to nothing. Okay, so I have been a part of the initiative to set up the Matrix Biology Society of India. This is one society which does not exist, and we think that there is a critical number of people in our country for which such an initiative needs to be established. Okay. Just yesterday I saw about the Biofilm Society, and I think we are hopefully going to start this. There has also been an initiative from NCBS, Jitu, Tapomoy to start an Indian Mechanobiology Society. Let's see, hopefully that will also go far. So in terms of learnings, I think collaboration is key. The first 3 years when I was sitting in civil engineering department, instead of cribbing why this, I met a chemical engineering faculty, framed a biology problem, a computational problem, and it helped us sustain to get at least some papers out in the short term. So collaboration, you have to turn these constraints into potential opportunities to reach out to other colleagues, maybe from the same department, from other departments, whereby you can get hold of work done, particularly if you don't have the necessary background in your own lab. Communication is very important when you are framing a question jointly in collaboration. What is the scope of the work? What is the scope of each other's contributions? If 2 PhD students from 2 different labs are involved, how is authorship and other issues going to be thought about? I think it's good to have that kind of clarity upfront as opposed to getting to heated arguments later on. And it is important to establish dedicated platforms. So many of you work in very niche areas. So when I had returned to India, mechanobiology was in its infancy. There were hardly few people, but there were still some individual efforts by people such as Pramod Kulkarni at Agra, who brought up this community together through meetings, through their own funding, institutional funding. I think it is important to catalyze such meetings so that we can have greater interaction, and the community can also grow. There can be exchange of reagents, material, ideas, techniques. Okay, so I think I'll skip this. So some of the major challenges that I faced is always, that the perspective that I bring on the table is a perspective that not many biology students have. How do you enthuse those students, particularly who have had difficulty in learning biology, physics, maths, that kind of orientation, and still say, well, there's ample experimental opportunity to learn, to do, and to grow. So, of course, administrative support at the institute level is another critical roadblock. So, at IIT Bombay, for example, they provide part support for admin staff who can actually help in troubleshooting gym purchases and other things. But this is very important, otherwise it becomes a mess when purchasing equipment within a very limited time frame is concerned. So I think I'll skip this slide, few teaching courses that I have been involved in. So my goal that I see is to actually transition, is to combine, go from basic to applied. I think at least in one or two areas we have reached there. IIT Bombay is a hotbed for entrepreneurship. In our department, 7 out of 31 faculty have already initiated their startups. And many of you are aware of the car pre-sale solution by our colleague, Professor Rahul Purwar. Okay? So I'm also thinking of that with at least 1 or 2 of these projects. And I constantly want to organize interdisciplinary mechanobiology workshops to broaden the exposure of students in biology to the interest of these areas. Sorry, just one slide. Yeah. So for postdoctoral fellows who are looking for jobs, I think it is very important to understand that our country is a very heterogeneous system. What you get in terms of funding, intramural funding, lab space, students, they are going to be your workhorses, right? What kind of students you need, okay? What is the teaching versus research requirement, okay? You need to actually have that clarity in your mind, what kind of profiling you would ideally want for yourself. For PIs, one thing that I should definitely harp on is to establish a computational arm of your research. Okay, in today's day and age, there's so much of single-cell RNA-seq data which is lying around. It is really a heaven to test and frame new hypotheses just by mining the data. But you need to establish the necessary analysis pipelines, presumably by collaborating with people with computer science and other backgrounds. Okay? AI, ML, other things, beyond just thinking beyond as buzzword, see how you can make it work in a specific context. I think that has to be learned. It will make sure that your lab runs even when funds are hard to come by. So I have been through at least 2 years when there was not a single drop of penny that came to my lab. Government money did not come. And this is very often the case. So you have to think of alternate ways of sustaining yourself. So with that, I will thank all of you. So this is a picture of my PhD supervisor who visited IIT Bombay 2 years back. I would like to thank my students and my collaborators both at IIT Bombay and outside, our funding resources and the facilities at IIT Bombay. Thank you.